Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Shipp.
Thank you, Roger. One of my assignments with the CIA was as a polygraph examiner. I call myself a recovering polygraph examiner. I go to weekly meetings now, trying to help me get over that. And I was an internal security investigator and a counterintelligence investigator, and I executed probably thousands of non-disclosure agreements for the CIA. So it's kind of divine providence in that I stood up against the CIA alone for the sake of my family against the misused, not the good system of secrecy, but the misused system of secrecy. And I have some things I want to share. I want to speak specifically to the witnesses that are out there that are afraid of their careers because of the non-disclosure agreement, which I'm going to talk about here shortly. Number one, don't fear. Like the famous saying goes, when the people fear their government, there's tyranny. When the government fears its people, there's liberty. So don't fear your government. And as a duty to your country, which I eventually made the decision to do at some risk, please come out to Congressman Wolf. I beg you. People have lost their lives. This is without question a cover-up. And we have a duty to our Constitution and to the people of the United States to come out and see that the truth is told. I have risked the price of that. I've signed several non-disclosure agreements and several compartmented agreements. I adore this country, the Constitution that it's based on, and I made the decision to do that simply because of that. And I speak to the witnesses and I ask them to think seriously about doing the same thing and going to Congressman Wolf. I have talked to him, and he is an honest man, and you can trust him. So I would exhort you to do that. What I want to do for the sake of the witnesses and their attorneys today is I want to talk about how the CIA is going to proceed through this and what they're going to do. It's critically important to understand how to navigate through getting exposure to what happened into Benghazi and the cover-up that is happening and will continue under the guise of secrecy and compartmentalization. So let me cover a couple of things here. As we know, we've had step-by-step accounts of the killing of Osama bin Laden and some information that was probably classified. We've had step-by-step accounts of what's going on in Syria, with the exception of some things about the gas. We've been given nothing about Benghazi. No, not even the smallest detail regarding what happened that evening. Now, my master's degree, humbly, is in forensic psychophysiology, and that's the detection of deception. And it's been a very painful year for me watching this all go on because the lies are so blatant. And the media will refuse to use the word lie, but that's exactly what it is. We're being told to lie. And when a government lies to its people, that is a constitutional crisis. So I want to talk about a couple of things important there. In relation specifically to John Brennan and his role in all of this. Initially, originally the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism and the head of the National Security Staff. He was a close foreign policy advisor to President Obama since 2008, going all the way up through Benghazi, and of course eventually nominated and appointed as the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was involved in the Benghazi attacks from the beginning, through the attacks themselves, to the end, and what is now apparently a cover-up going on presently. It was Mr. Brennan who removed al-Qaeda from the talking points when they came down the chain, who was full well of the intelligence that was included 3 days after the attack regarding connections to al-Qaeda. I would ask Mr. Brennan, why don't you come forward and tell the American people what you were involved in and why you took those points out. It was Mr. Brennan that supported the administration's unimaginable and unwavering support for the Islamic Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt despite its atrocities, with the agreement of the Muslim Brotherhood national security advisors that surround and are close to the President of the United States. And people need to know that. It was Mr. Brennan that ordered the words from the OIC memorandum from 47 Arabic and Asian countries. It was Mr. Brennan that ordered the words describing radical Islamic terror for example, specifically, to be removed from FBI, CIA, and DoD counterterrorism training manuals the words war on terror, radical Islam, jihad, or anything that indicated that radical Islam was related to the war on terror. That has been taken out of FBI programs. I have FBI friends now, some of which are considering leaving because they cannot get up any longer and teach against radical Islam using those words in government-sponsored training courses. That came down from Mr. Brennan. Now he's the director of the CIA. Access to the 33 to 35 CIA witnesses over the last year has been denied, not just to the American people, but to Congress. And again, this is a constitutional government. We're talking reporting to Congress. And this information has been withheld from the congressional bodies. Again, that's a serious constitutional crisis. Why? Why is the CIA withholding this? We know now that reportedly the CIA is ordering its employees to sign additional non-disclosure agreements regarding Benghazi. Now, I issued thousands of non-disclosure agreements, and I can maybe give you a little bit of an idea why they are so afraid. The CIA non-disclosure agreement stipulates criminal penalties for anyone that engages in an unauthorized disclosure to a member of the press or to anyone that does not have the necessary clearance for that information. Criminal penalties. You can go to prison or be threatened with going to prison for disclosing that information, not to mention losing your career. Hence, maybe these hang-ups when somebody tried to call these people. They're not just afraid for their careers, they're afraid of going to jail, and perhaps some of them think that their safety is in danger. Been there. But the non-disclosure agreement is a very powerful tool when it's used in the wrong hands. It was created to protect legitimate secrecy, and that would be military movements to protect our men and women in the service, to protect some of the assets that we dealt with in the CIA, to protect their lives. It was created for that, but is now being used for nefarious means, to keep the truth, not just from Congress, but from the American people. Let me explain a little bit about how things go on inside the CIA. Recently, and this is very interesting, Mr. Brennan has come out in a 3-page letter. I don't know if any of you are aware of that. Sent to the chairman of the intelligence community and asked about the frequency of these polygraph tests that are being given to the CIA witnesses. Now, as a former CIA polygraph examiner, I can tell you that a CIA polygraph, if anyone has ever been through one of those, that is not an interview or a fun event. That is an interrogation, and it's very intimidating. I went through several because I was in the counterintelligence center. But if you get one of those once a month, that is intimidation. In all my years in the CIA, both as an internal security investigator, a counterintelligence investigator, and a polygraph examiner, I never saw that frequency of polygraph examinations given to CIA employees ever, especially on a single issue. Not once. That would have been highly out of the ordinary, and if that is being used for intimidation, it would also be illegal. Mr. Brennan came out in his statement recently, and as you always have to do with the CIA, you have to examine everything he said specifically, based especially upon his background. In his 3-page letter to the House committee, he said, he states that his agency will provide quote-unquote relevant information to facilitate meetings between quote-unquote CIA-affiliated personnel and oversight committees. Who are these personnel is the question, but CIA-affiliated. He didn't say CIA employees or contractors. He said CIA affiliated. Now, we all know that the CIA, I do, some of us in here do, has a long history of taking nefarious information when it has to, and I've seen that personally, and making it classified and then using that as a basis for withholding it from Congress. They can do that. They have classifying authority, and they have done it with some regularity. All you have to do is classify something if you want to keep it internally. So, CIA-affiliated personnel, Mr. Brennan says he is going to make available to the committee. That could be someone that didn't have the clearance to know what operations were going on in Benghazi. That could be a logistics officer that was connected with Benghazi but didn't know exactly what logistics were going on. That could be someone that was either in the States or in Benghazi but had no access or clearance to what appears to be the collection of very significant arms in Libya and possibly the transport of those arms to Turkey, which, if that was done without the knowledge of Congress and if that was done without the proper channels, would be a violation of international law. It appears that may have been the case and may be one of the reasons why the lid on Benghazi has not yet been taken off. Mr. Brennan went on in his 3-page memo and denied that CIA officers have ever been intimidated. I've been in there. I've seen that they do get intimidated. So I know that happens. Did it happen in this case? I think if we look at the facts in total, I think it has. He stated one very important, powerful thing in his 3-page memorandum. Information identifying those officers involved in Benghazi is classified, not releasable to the public. There's your kicker. That's where, and I adjure, and I know Congressman Wolf is a very astute man, and I know he's going to drill down into this, but there's your kicker, is to get past that classification of who was involved in this operation and not get back a bunch of blacked out documents with blacked out names and get to the truth is going to be very, very difficult. I've been asked, can it be done to get the CIA to do that? I'll explain what I think is the possible solution here in a moment. But I want to talk about the non-disclosure agreement a little bit, and I want you to explain what they can do with that document. As I mentioned, it threatens criminal penalties for unauthorized disclosures to anybody outside of the CIA that does not have access to that information or the higher compartment for that. All CIA employees and contractors sign this agreement as a condition of employment, so they're already bound by the non-disclosure agreement. If they're being hit with a non-disclosure agreement again, highly out of the ordinary if it's not for an additional compartment. After the fact, you never do that. You only do that before the fact. As a mandate for receiving the clearance, and this is what the witnesses and their attorneys need to understand, as a mandate for receiving a clearance, the CIA can demand lawyers also sign a CIA non-disclosure agreement, and then they use the agreement to control opposing counsel, all of the court documentation, and all of the attorney-client information, and bind that up within the CIA and outside of the attorney-client relationship. The CIA uses the non-disclosure agreement to force opposing attorneys to hand over to the agency all complaints, briefs, and motions before filing them in court or even passing them to congressmen or senators. The non-disclosure agreement prevents opposing counsel from releasing any evidence to the public. The CIA can redact any information it deems unsuitable from any documents. It has complete control over all the witness and plaintiff's court statements and documents based on the non-disclosure agreement. Witnesses also should know that the CIA will intentionally take up to a year or more to grant a clearance for the witnesses' attorneys, and the witnesses' attorneys are probably experiencing that right now. I've seen that happen. It only takes 24 hours to grant a CIA clearance to an attorney. It's a basic secret clearance. They can have it done in 24 hours. One of their MOs in a case that they don't want to go public is they will stretch that out for a year. And I've seen that personally, just to buy time so that attorney cannot be cleared and cannot represent that witness, that plaintiff, whatever the case may be. The CIA denies attorneys access to potential witnesses and withholds the identities of its witnesses. This is happening now, I think, in Benghazi. Using secrecy, the agency can claim it has evidence when indeed no evidence exists. The CIA labels any evidence that may reveal wrongdoing as a source or a method, a very broad definition, and they don't define exactly what that means in these cases. If the CIA's actions may become public, the agency has the power and authority to invoke what is the little known, what is called the state's secrets privilege. If the case goes that far, and if a federal judge decides this witness has got a case, we want it to proceed, the CIA can and will and has done so over 400 times, despite saying they've only done it 40 times or so. They will invoke the state's secrets privilege, and the entire case, the witness's case, every name involved, every fact involved will be shut down based on a different version or different definition of national security. It will be sealed in court, and not even the witnesses, congressman or senator, will have access to that information because it is now a judiciary sealed matter, and it will never see the light of day again. The implications that this has on Benghazi: it is relatively apparent that the CIA is blocking the testimony of the witnesses that were on the ground the day of Benghazi. Why? When you engage in that sort of activity, you are covering something up. Was it arms shipments that were not approved that were going to Turkey? We know that there were thousands of man-pad missiles that were missing after the agency collected the cash left over by Muammar Gaddafi. They don't know where those missiles went. Obviously, we think they wound up in the hands of the jihadists. It was an operation that went horribly bad. So we've got 33 people that we know of, maybe 35 by some accounts, that are being intimidated from coming forward because of this non-disclosure agreement and because of the polygraph examiners that are like, it's like someone squeezing a tube of toothpaste. They're going to stay after them until they get information out about whether they've talked to anyone outside of their chain of command, and if so, they're threatened with potential criminal prosecution, termination of employment, which of course affects the security of their families. So it's very serious things that are involved. My recommendation, I think the only thing and the only way that we are ever going to get to talk to the CIA witnesses is, number one, they need to love their country more than they fear what the CIA is doing. Number one. It's a thing called patriotism. God and country. Somebody mentioned prayer. I've done a lot of that. The United States of America was founded on prayer. It began with prayer, and I believe it can begin again with prayer if we all do that. And I think that needs to be done for these witnesses who are in a very difficult situation. But they need to love their country first. And start from that standpoint and eliminate the fear and the intimidation that they've been put under. And they need to have someone to go to be able to do that and tell their story. I believe Congressman Frank Wolf's recommendation for the Select Committee to investigate Benghazi, House Resolution 36, which will have full subpoena authority to hold public hearings, is the answer. Public hearings, not classified hearings where nobody really knows what's going on. That's our problem. Some things need to be classified, other things need to be brought to the public. This is a constitutional government. It's a critical balance. Friendly subpoenas, as Congressman Wolf mentioned, should be issued to Benghazi witnesses, protecting them from retribution by the CIA or the Department of State. And again, I would adjure them. Are you willing to risk your career, even if you do act upon the subpoena, and even if you do go and testify when you get back to Langley? Just a matter of time. It's going to affect. I did counterintelligence cases, and those people's careers, innocent people who were cleared, their careers were ruined for the rest of their lives, the rest of their career lives. But this has got to be done. People have been killed, and our democracy has a wound in it because of this. So let me say this in closing, because it's very important. House Resolution 36 has got to be done. We should not just ask for it, we need to demand it. The American people need to demand this from our representatives and from our government. There is no other option. We have got to demand that this happens and bring these people accountable and get Brennan back to testify and Petraeus back to testify and Secretary Clinton back to testify. Susan Rice has been moved to her new position as a national security advisor, and I think there was a little trickery in that because now she's immune from testimony in Benghazi. Most people don't know that. Now she does not have to testify, and that was a chess move. But we need to demand that this happens. And let me just close with this. Deception is not just a direct lie, which has occurred in the case of Benghazi, relatively obviously. But it is also appearing cooperative while intentionally manipulating the release of information so enough evidence is hidden and the truth is concealed. So I would take Mr. Brennan's statements and I would take them apart word for word, and I would have him amplify those statements that I just quoted to you and explain to us exactly what those statements mean. A government that lies to its people is a government that has sidestepped the Constitution and undermined the basic tenets of our freedoms. A government that lies to its people. The government is accountable to the people. The American people are not subjects of a government similar to a monarchy, one that conceals information from the people's representatives in Congress and labels its nefarious activities as secret for the government's eyes only. Simply put, this is not transparency and could represent the most subtle forms of tyranny. Anyway, thank you very much. Questions from anyone? Yes.
Well, one thing you said I thought was really interesting, that you said that it would be illegal for the CIA agents to be polygraphed more than, once a month or more than once every 3 months. And in fact, Jake Tapper's program reported as much on August 1st. And then August 2nd, all of a sudden, all the embassies were on lockdown because they were going to be attacked by Al-Qaeda. That's just an aside. But, what about that?
A polygraph should be, since it's a very significant thing, and it's a very significant breach of personal privacy, has got to come down through channels, typically from the director. There are strict parameters on a polygraph examination, and for it to be given on a monthly basis, I've never seen it given on a monthly basis. It has to be either a significant security breach based on law, a counterintelligence case involving the FBI, or an espionage case similar to Ames or something. To give it as witness intimidation is a violation of agency regulation, and to give it to intimidate witnesses from testifying to Congress is illegal.
Well, it seems like the material for H.R. 36 is really, it's just like right under our noses. Because the report, I thought the report said it was twice every other week. I mean, it was very, very frequent.
That would be absolutely mind-boggling.
Right, and non-disclosure agreements, and that's what was reported. So therefore, the other part of this is that the CIA agents are evidently talking. And maybe if they can talk about this, they'll be able to talk about, the other thing you said would be illegal with the transfer of weapons. So maybe, because
Which I think they know about, many of them.
And it just seems to me that the thing that this does seem to mirror Watergate. And the thing
on
that
steroids.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that little scenario of being called up and the CIA agents who gave you my number, click. That's right out of all the President's Men.
That's fear. I mean, that's not. I think that's not ignore. That's fear.
Right. So that would be the other illegal thing. So it just seems like it's just all the material is there, and the other one was the big elephant in the room. What was it? What was said earlier about that was illegal? Oh, having a special consulate. That's illegal.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a multifaceted cover-up. I think it's a CIA operation gone horribly wrong, being done behind the backs of Congress and shipping weapons, possibly in violation of international law. That's one part. I think Stephen's presence and role within Benghazi may have been illegal in terms of there being no consulate or embassy, and him, by the accounts that I have read, he probably had knowledge of the weapons and where they were going and what was happening, and he'd actually met with one of the folks that owned the ships that were transporting some of these things. There's another part of the cover-up. I think this is a multifaceted, and the weapons were going to jihadists. The CIA sponsored the jihadists that overthrew Gaddafi, who was off the state-sponsored terrorist list, who had gotten rid of his WMDs, and yet this administration went in, grabbed the weapons, and gave them to jihadists in Libya. That's another part of this, I think, multifaceted cover-up that's going on.
Would it also be illegal for Admiral Ham to be fired for basically doing his constitutional duty? That seems to me questionable.
It's questionable, but I think the commander-in-chief can fire whoever he wants.
Oh, really? Even if it's...
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's the way, if I understand it correctly, that the Code of Military Justice and other things are written that didn't go just like that. Yeah.
I appreciate your comments, very interesting. Now, One thing I don't quite understand, though, it would be highly ironic, to say the least, if this president, who wants to enforce international norms in Syria, is violating international law with secret CIA operations to provide arms to terrorists in Libya and Syria. And these were not reported to Congress. Now, that's bad enough, but it would seem to me if that was the case, then Boehner and other top Republicans would have a vested interest in exposing this.
Unless they're in on it.
That's where I was going with it. Now, you see, I mean, that's the perfect scandal for Republicans who want to bring down this president, unless they were in on it.
And what an ingenious trap. Come here, Gang of Eight, or come here, Mr. Banner. Let me brief you on a program that we think is going to be really something. And they brief them and they get their approval, and they don't understand the full scope of what the operation is doing. And then they find out later, and it's like, uh-oh, and they jump right in there, and they don't want this coming out either. You know, why would Boehner not want this to happen unless there was some personal or political damage that he will suffer if it does come out?
That's your conclusion.
Yes,
And that's what makes most sense.
I think so.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I got to go prepare for my IRS audit, so I got to go.